Look at this, man.
Enough with Jay Briscoe.
What the hell is this shit?
Jay.
What the hell is this
so
shit?
afraid of reality.
What the
You're
hell
so
is this
afraid of the
shit?
truth.
Fuck that mother. You. Fuck you. You little.
Taite motherfucking Kubo. So you already saw my thoughts on the previous couple of chapters, and I am sorry that I haven't been uploading for the past like week and a half. My life has just come to a screeching halt because of, mostly because of my GRE that's coming up. That, who knows, by the time this is up, maybe I'll have already taken it. But now for a video that's been long overdue, that I've been planning for a long time, and I've finally just sat down. I've got the script more or less ready, and here we go. Obviously, we're not going to talk about like the Bleach chapters. I feel like the internet, YouTube in general, is so oversaturated with reviews that unless I really have something important and unique to add to the conversation, or I just get to it really early, generally I'll hold off on the reviews. So now that Bleach is ending, there's a ton of like fights that I think logically could have happened that would have been badass to see. And I'm going to be listing them off and explaining in detail how that could have gone down, was the fight going to be interesting, and who I think would have won that fight. And again, I'm not going to base these choices based off of like characters that I personally would like to see fight. It's a little bit, but it's not going to be solely based off that. So for example, I wouldn't have like Yamamoto versus Ichigo because they have no reason to fight. Or like Uryu versus, I don't fucking know, Chad. Would that be a good fight? Maybe. Maybe pre-time skip Chad and Uryu, that would be a much closer fight. But again, they don't have a reason to fight within the context of the series. So here I'm going to be focusing on fights that perhaps did have a reason to occur in the series, and could have easily occurred had something gone just a little bit differently, with a different sequence of events, if you're following what I'm saying here. So without further ado, we're going to start with the first one. Sosuke Aizen versus the Royal Guard. Oh man. So it's I really always found it strange that this never came up, this possible scenario that could have happened had Aizen succeeded at some point during the Arrancar arc in creating the Oken and entering the Royal Palace. And initially I was going to include Gin and Tosin along with this, Gin, Aizen, and Tosin versus the Royal Guard, but honestly Tosin is kind of fodder. I really don't like Tosin, and Gin would have betrayed him by then anyway. It was his plan all along to betray Aizen at some point, so supposedly we'll look at this from a perspective if Aizen had just beaten Ichigo at the end. He's in his ascended form, and he makes the Oken, he makes his way to the Royal Guard. Do they pose any kind of credible threat to him? Honestly, there's only two of the Royal Guard he needs to be worried about in any extent, especially in his ascended form. If he was still in his base form, maybe he'd have a little bit more of a chance, but I still wouldn't really count on it for the Royal Guard to do anything to Aizen. But the two people he needs to be worried about are Nimaya and Ichibei, because they've got some fucking moves. And it's mostly not even because the other Royal Guard members are necessarily that weak, but we just don't know enough about them. Shutara and Hikifune, we don't even know their name of their Zanpakutos. We don't know their Shikais. And the other guy, Kurenji, we do know his Shikai and a little bit of his abilities based around healing with the hot spring water. But other than that, I mean, he just gets wastelanded by Yuha the minute he releases a Shikai. So we just don't know that much about the other three Royal Guard members. The two that we really know a lot about, or somewhat, are Nimaya and Ichibei. We'll start with Nimaya, and mostly it's the sword that he uses on the Schutzstaffen that was really impressive. Like, really, the whole fight between the Royal Guard and the Schutzstaffen, it was really just Nimaya a lot of the time. And I mean, he one-shotted a couple of the Schutzstaffen that I consider some of the most powerful Bleach characters, period. Lily Barrow and Gerard. One hit with that one sword. You know what? I'm gonna go look up the name of that sword, because I didn't fucking do that. Alright, Saya Fushi is this sword that is apparently so sharp that he can't really hold it in like a sheath or a scabbard, so he doesn't really consider it a sword. And nevertheless, he uses this to just wasteland most of the shoot stuff, and except for Askin, who survives momentarily. And especially given the context of looking at it from right now, and looking at how Lily Barrow and Gerard Valkyrie performed in their later fights. Motherfucking Gerard Valkyrie, in his next fight with all the other captains, Ranji, Kenpachi, the Visors, Ranji, did I say Renji twice, Bach? Byakuya, that's what I meant to say. Hitsugaya, he just doesn't fucking die. And Saya Fushi, even though Gerard wasn't in any kind of Volt standing state, he was just in base form, he hadn't even grown really, but just one-shots him. Like, it's confirmed, he was dead until Yuha used Ash Wallet to bring him all back. That's a big deal. I mean, that's a powerful ass sword. But the real question is, will it do any credible damage to Ascended Aizen? I think it would do some damage. I think it would do about as much damage as Ichigo Zanpakuto did. And I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. The difference being that Nimaiya himself won't necessarily have the raw power or Reiatsu to utilize Sayafushi to its full extent against Yuha. So even though it's powerful if he lands a blow on him, that's the big if. Would he even land a blow on Ascended Aizen? Of that, I don't know. I mean, we're talking about motherfucking Sosuke Aizen here. He transcended all the Shinigami. Except, like, debatably Yamamoto. We're gonna get to that in a later fight. And then the second threat to Aizen, the only other credible threat, is of course Ichibei. It's because he actually put up a fight against Yuha, and it was just because the Almighty is a whole bunch of bullshit hacks that he escaped the power of Ichibei's Shinuchi, the Bankai basically, of his little paintbrush sword that allows him to rename anything and give it the attributes of whatever he named. So I could see that being used pretty interestingly, along with Nimaiya's power. If Ichibei actually manages to rename Aizen into something that makes him vulnerable, suddenly Nimaiya becomes a threat. So you see how they kind of work off of each other's powers here, in a form where it's actually possible for them to conceivably win. But if I were a betting man, I mean Aizen, easily. The fact that he didn't really even mention them just shows that he didn't consider them a threat. And I'm sure he knew about them. It's not like he didn't go into this without some kind of plan. If Aizen hardly even mentioned the Royal Guard, it's just because he didn't find them to be much of a threat. If anything, I think he was more scared of Yamamoto than the Royal Guard, given how much trouble he went through to seal Ryujinjaka with Wonder Weiss, the modified Aranker. So that's my take on that fight. Definitely something that was never really mentioned for some reason. I don't know why. But given the sequence of events, had Aizen won, that was a fight that would happen. The second one is one I really had to put some thought into and think about, like, all of these characters, I guess, abilities and what their power levels were more or less like at the time this event occurs in particular. And this is when Stark kidnaps Orihime essentially and takes her back to Las Noches to Yukiura before he leaves to the real world. Now, I think it's pretty possible that we could have had an actual fight going on here with Kenpachi and Ichigo versus Coyote Stark, the Primera Espada. The first reason this fight has a good reason for existing is that we were under this presumption the whole time that eventually Ichigo was going to fight the top Espadas. He's climbing up the ranks. He first fought the Pre-Verona Espada, and then he fought Grimmjow, and then he fought Noitora, and then he fought Yukiura. He didn't win all of those battles, but he's climbing up and he's getting stronger. And I feel like the Wakamundo arc in general would have been a lot better if they had kept it in Wakamundo for the most part. I feel like Fate Karakura shouldn't have. I feel like Fate Karakura bled into Wakamundo arc a bit too much, where it takes away from the from Ichigo encountering the top Espadas, literally the top three. And so I think it would have been cool if Ichigo had some kind of interaction with Stark, who was the first Espada. And really, this could have just been a replacement in and of itself for the Yami fight later on. This first encounter doesn't even have to be conclusive when Stark is abducting Orihime, and both Kenpachi and Ichigo try and swing at him, but it ultimately amounts to nothing, which is kind of a wasted opportunity. I mean, honestly, it makes more sense for Aizen to just bring Yami along to the real world, and then leave Stark in charge of guarding Las Noches, which makes a ton of sense because he's one of the most intelligent Espadas, and he's the first one. Remember, at this point in the story, we don't know that a Zero Espada exists, and he's a dumbass anyway, so he wouldn't even be fit to be in charge of Las Noches. I don't know why Aizen, unless Yukiura really was the strongest all along in the Segunda Etapa, but he's number 4, and ultimately Stark is number 1. So in my mind, it makes more sense for Aizen to leave Stark in charge of Las Noches, sort of the second in command, while he's away with the other Espadas in Fate Karakura, which ultimately he didn't even need because he's Aizen. That was just all for show, if you ask me. Plus the fact that he's already been to the real world twice and Stark hasn't. So I really don't understand why Aizen left him there. I guess he was just that big of a dumbass that he didn't think he'd be useful, but I mean, a lot of those Aronker that he brought with him aren't exactly bright either. So again, this first encounter with Ichigo and Kenpachi versus Stark doesn't even need to be conclusive. I mean, honestly, I think Stark could take both of them without his Zanpakuto, like without Lilinet. He doesn't really have a Zanpakuto, like he just has a regular sword, and then Lilinet is the source of his power. Yeah, I mean, Kenpachi's more questionable whether he could actually take him in just base form. I don't think he could come close to defeating Kenpachi, but he would hold his own, and at least get away from that encounter rather confidently, and as well as just solidly beating Ichigo, especially if we're talking about Ichigo before his Vasto Lorde transformation against Ukiura, which boosted the power of his Hollow Mask. If Stark had access to his resurrection though, because remember, Lilinet is not even there, but let's just assume that he has access to his resurrection, he brings along Lilinet to this encounter to take Orihime, would he beat Kenpachi? That's really the big question. Whether he beats Ichigo or not, I think he probably would. Honestly, during this first encounter, Ichigo's kind of an irrelevant factor. It's mostly whether he can beat Kenpachi in his release state with the help of Ichigo and perhaps even Orihime a little bit. Oh man, that's tough because, I mean, Espada number 5, given Kenpachi's power level pre-time skip with his limiters and everything, and also the fact that if we say that Stark wins this battle, then doesn't that kind of contradict the beating that happens in the canon between, I mean, Kenpachi just annihilating Yami in his own release state. But that's the thing though, Yami's an idiot, and he's also a big, slow fucking target. He's honestly the perfect matchup for Kenpachi, even if he's stronger than Stark in terms of Reiatsu in his release state. Whereas Stark, the way he fights is kind of the opposite. He's quick on his feet, he's intelligent, and his main source of combat in his release state are ranged attacks. He's got the Cero pistols. I think the Wolves in particular would really give Kenpachi a run for his money, because he's just going to be tempted to run in there and just going to try and tank everything. With the Cero pistols, I could at least see him credibly using his Zanpakuto to block them, kind of the same way that Shunsui did in the actual fight. But with the Wolves, it's a lot trickier because they latch onto the target and then they explode. And I feel like that could really throw off Kenpachi if Stark just manages to use his speed, keep his distance, and use Lilinet and the Wolves to just wear Kenpachi down. So I think ultimately Stark does win, mostly just based on his abilities and how they're different from Yami's. And I feel like you guys, I hope that you guys understand why Kenpachi would do so much better. He did so much better against Yami than he would in a hypothetical matchup against Stark. Though once again, this doesn't even need to be all that conclusive. and that can lead into a rivalry between Ichigo and Stark, to where he would fight Stark after defeating Yukiura, which I think that would be a much better replacement for the Yami fight, which ultimately was off-screened anyway, and it gives Ichigo a more credible boost after Yukiura, because after Yukiura, there's still such a wide gap between him and Aizen, and I feel like maybe if he had one more fight, it would have been a little bit more credible that he would even have a chance, and perhaps Stark would be the gateway to Ichigo perhaps starting to overcome the gap leading up to Aizen. And then perhaps we wouldn't even have needed the whole Mugetsu crap, or the Dangai Ichigo. Honestly, Dangai Ichigo in and of himself bothers me a lot more than Mugetsu, than Final Getsuga Tensho. But that's a conversation for another video. So we'll move on to the next fight now. So speaking of the fake Karakura town, there's a good argument to be made that Yamamoto should have just fought by himself against everybody. So this is Yamamoto versus everybody. And to an extent this is logical, to an extent not really. But I think it's more logical than what actually happened, as they just kind of stood there in a face-off as individual fights happened. That was just fucking absurd. That was stupid. And then Yamamoto using his Shikai just so selectively. Why not just try and incinerate Tosin, Gin, and Aizen? Why try and just trap them, just leave them like that? And then he took all that time for the, what's it called? The Jigoku whatever technique. It just made no fucking sense. Why didn't, he's clearly more powerful than most of the people there, so why didn't he just wasteland everybody by himself? So this is asking ourselves, could he do it? And I'm going to approach this similarly to how I did the Aizen versus Royal Guard fight, because there's only a couple factors that would be a credible threat to Yamamoto. Actually, most everybody just doesn't even stand a chance against him, even Justin Shikai. Especially because of all the Kido he could probably do with his offhand, because, he still has his offhand at this point. So really, besides Aizen, which is pretty obvious, there's two other potentially credible threats among Aizen's group that he brings to fake Karakura Town. And this is all assuming that this would happen before Wonder Weiss arrives with all the Menos Grande and all of that, because Aizen's a goddamn idiot just for a moment and decides not to bring Wonder Weiss from the start. And that's the only reason that this fight is even on the list, because it would have been completely logical for Yamamoto to just try and wasteland everybody before Wonder Weiss arrived. So, I mean, I guess it could have happened. So the only two credible threats besides Aizen to Yamamoto Genryusai, one of them is Baragon, because Baragon's power is absolute hacks, and it's kind of undefined whether Yamamoto will be able to just brute force his way past Baragon's abilities. Because, I mean, Soifun kind of tried that, and, I mean, her Bankai is fairly powerful, I would say. I would say it's at least as powerful as Yamamoto's regular Shikai attacks. I think that's a fair assumption, even if it's ultimately just a headcanon. And it didn't do jack shit. Well, it did, but it really did. It angered him more than it damaged him. And of course, ultimately, it was Hachi that finished him off. And the whole thing about Baragon, his aspect of death, his old age, that really doesn't help Yamamoto. He's one of the oldest characters, probably period, in Bleach. So, Baragon definitely a threat to him. And if anything, Baragon's downfall in this fight would mostly be from his pride rather than his lack of ability. I think he definitely has the ability to kill Yamamoto, even if he's careless or distracted. Or, because they're really actually kind of similar, Yamamoto and Baragon. They're both really arrogant, prideful. I think they're just the hottest shit since sliced bread. And they both kind of have stuff to back it up. But I see them as characters that they have hacks abilities and they can easily kill each other should one of them become too hyped. I mean, like if Yamamoto tries to flex, he's gonna lose like a limb or something to Baragon at least. I wouldn't say die, because I think Yamamoto has ways around being completely consumed by Respira, and we've seen that it's kind of slow. So I wouldn't necessarily say, I kind of take that back. I don't think Baragon could probably kill Yamamoto, but he would at least injure him. He's one of the only people in that group that can even injure him. The other one is Gin. And hear me out on this one. I think Gin is really underrated as like a fighter in general. A lot of people see him as like the sneaky, like tactician kind of fighter, and they really don't appreciate the displays of just raw Reiatsu, the raw power that he has. The example I like to use the most is his fight with Ichigo, where towards the end of the fight, he's just like, alright, put on your fucking mask, hit me with a black Getsuga Tensho as hard as you can. And he just takes it, he tanks it. He doesn't even, like, flinch at Ichigo's mask. Remember, this is post-Yukiora, post-Vasto Lorde, Hollow Mask, Getsuga Tensho, full power, and Gin tanks it, no problem. That's an impressive display of just raw Reiatsu. So I think he's definitely underrated in that regard as just being like a raw power fighter overall. I would say he's definitely a notch above basically all of the Espada, Baragon, because he is Baragon. And also Gin's abilities, Gin's Bankai ability, especially the fact that he kept it secret from everybody. Does Yamamoto know about Gin's Bankai ability? I would doubt it. I wouldn't think that he had any reason to know or care that he might not know. Because, even Aizen didn't know, and the whole point of that whole idea was that Gin would kill Aizen at the last second with his Bankai. He almost did it too. Ascended Aizen almost died to that poison. And Aizen said, had it been a moment earlier, the Hogyoku wouldn't have been completely merged with me, and he would have died. So, I feel like Yamamoto's the kind of fighter that he just tries to because he thinks he's better than everybody else, and he's kind of right. But another example that happens during his actual fight with Aizen, his method of trying to get close to Aizen is actually letting himself be pierced. And, he might have the same mentality with Gin. He doesn't know Gin's Bankai ability. If he tries to go with that same approach of trying to trap Gin that way, he could get himself seriously hurt. And you combine that with Baragon's abilities and perhaps a couple of the other two Espada, and we're looking at a scenario where Yamamoto is in danger of being seriously injured, if not killed, based on the displays we've seen from Baragon and Gin respectively. And then you add Aizen to the mix, and suddenly Yamamoto has like a credible threat of dying in this fight. That being said, I guess the whole point is that depending on Aizen's interference with this potential fight, because I know Aizen likes to jack around a lot too, so if his involvement is minimal and Yamamoto doesn't fuck around too much, then yeah, Yamamoto wins pretty easily. That being said, if Yamamoto decides to be an idiot and Aizen interferes with the fight a lot, yeah, Yamamoto could easily die here, which is something I never thought I'd say. Honestly, going into this, I thought I was just going to give Yamamoto the win by default, but no, after thinking about it, there's some scenarios where the dude could die. Alright, we're moving on to the next one because we're almost, we've spent a lot of time. So next we have a matchup that is just another one of those one dude versus a bunch of other dudes, and that's Ichigo versus... Oh man, I'm so sad that this didn't happen. Ichigo really needed this fight to hype up his new post Royal Guard powers. Ichigo versus the 8 Stern Ritter that confront him and I think Renji as they make their way up to the Silburn where the Schutzstaffen and Yuha are. Ichigo gets halted by 8 Stern Ritter. You know what? It's Nanana, Basby. You know what? I have a list. I have a screenshot. I can read off the list of all the Stern Raiders that confront Ichigo, and for a couple chapters it looked like he was gonna fight all of them. And I really wish this fight happened, because for a number of reasons I think Ichigo would have won, honestly. And that would have been such a badass thing to see. It would be reminiscent of stuff like the Soul Society arc, Ichigo's arrival after his Bankai training, and him just owning the 3 lieutenants that come after him. It would be kind of like a Goku versus the Ginyu Force kind of moment, where we see the fruits of Ichigo's training and labor. But no, the next fight we get a little scuffle with Candace. I guess that was okay, but when you consider the fact that the next two battles that Ichigo is in, he catches those nice fat L's versus Askin, and then Yuha just embarrasses him like in their first encounter in the Silburn. And I think he really needed like another solid fight to solidify that this dude means business, and that and I guess just to kind of balance out the fact that he is a little bitch compared to Yuha. So this fight definitely needed to happen. I'm disappointed that it didn't. So okay, I'm gonna go get the list of the Stern Ritters that actually confront the actual 8 Stern Ritter in specific, because I only remember a few of them. So it was Maninas, Robert, Latato, Basby, Nanana, Candace, Pepe, and Giselle. And I'm kind of taking account all these Stern Ritters' abilities. I don't think there's a single really ability that could have caused Ichigo too much trouble. In other words, none of those Stern Ritters had like the uber hacks abilities of say like Askin or Lilith Barrow that would have massively tilted the fight in their favor. A lot of them are kind of just brute force fighters, or their powers are really gimmicky bullshit. Like, do you really think Pepe would have any credible influence over Ichigo? I kind of have a hard time seeing that. Even if he does hit him with the beam, or whatever, I don't think it would hinder Ichigo to the point where he just cannot fight. Who else we got? Basby? No. Robert? No. Nanana could be a threat. I feel like if they're actually coordinated and Nanana uses his underbelly ability from a distance and just observes Ichigo Reiatsu, maybe. I mean, we've already seen that Candace is fodder compared to Ichigo. Maninas, another, like, you just don't beat Ichigo with brute strength. That's the problem here. And a lot of these Stern Ritters are like brute force fighters. Anything we've seen from Robert, we don't get to see a lot of like special abilities by him. He just has like his little gun. Maninas, I guess the Tato is kind of scary because she can just swallow up. Like, she has like almost like an area of effect with her fucking mouth. But other than that, even she's not that much of an issue from a power standpoint. If anything, she's more of a problem because she's like a tactician. She can perhaps rally the Stern Ritter together and actually coordinate with them. If that happens, the fight definitely becomes a lot harder for Ichigo. But like, I would say this is almost a given just in Shikai. Shikai plus Hollow Form. And once he was Bankai, like, even though we didn't get to see a whole lot of the Bankai that when he actually performs it, which is pretty disappointing. If we just base it on the old scheme and just assume that it boosts power and speed, then I think he has this one in the bag, honestly. Considering the 8 Stern Ritter in particular that he's up against. Giselle could be a problem, just because if Ichigo takes out any of the Stern Ritters before her, she can bring them back as zombies, so... And I don't think at this point Ichigo knows too much about Giselle really at all. So I guess that would just come down to the chance whether Ichigo manages to take out Giselle before the others. Then it would be a much easier fight for him. The biggest threats to Ichigo are probably, I would say, just the Stern Ritters that display unusual or special abilities that don't have to do with power. So I guess that would be Pepe. He's kind of a joke Stern Ritter, to be honest. Giselle and Nanana. Those are the 3 that I think would be actual threats. The rest of them, not so much. I guess Latato for being a tactician and potentially rallying them together. Overall, though, I think this could be a solid, impressive win for Ichigo that he sorely needed. So, yeah, I will forever resent that this fight did not happen. Speaking of Meninas, I feel like she's kind of the perfect Stern Ritter to take on Chad. They both kind of have brute force, brute strength kind of abilities. And I consider Meninas overall to be one of the least threatening Stern Ritters just because she's not particularly intelligent. She doesn't have a lot going for her in terms of like absurd hacks or unusual abilities, like in the lines of Gremmy. That's the other Stern Ritter I forgot. There's no way in fucking hell Ichigo can take Gremmy plus 7 Stern Ritter, for example. But Chad, I don't feel Chad never got any justice in this arc. And if he was gonna have one good fight, I think Meninas would probably be a good pick. The only problem with that is that Meninas herself never got too much screen time. After Yuha uses the Ashwallen for the first time to heal or revive the shoot stuff, and I mean, she's really not seen again, and it's just kind of assumed that she died either during the first or the second Ashwallen, which is super inconsistent because like Basby and Nanana survived the first Ashwallen, which makes no fucking sense with what's explained later and how Gerard and like Robert just disintegrate. It's super inconsistent. So the condition of Meninas throughout the last like stretch of the manga is just completely ambiguous, and I think that's the main reason why this fight just didn't happen. As well as the fact that like I don't even think Kubo himself he definitely doesn't give a fuck about Chad. I might give a fuck about Chad a little bit because he's Hispanic or part Hispanic and I'm Hispanic and I relate to him. And I think he's a decent, like, intriguing character overall. Not particularly he's definitely very one-dimensional, but he's tolerable, and I can relate to him somewhat. And he got he just got cannon foddered in this arc. And really ever since the substitute Shinigami arc, he got like one good fight since then. So moving on to a fight or maybe perhaps a series of fights. This is another just kind of a fun one that I put in here. Unohana versus Mundo. Oh boy. What's that one dude's name? The tree. The fucking tree, the Exquisas guy. The Executioner. Rudaborn, that's his name. Oh man, did you dodge a bullet? Fuck. Unohana. Oh no. Oh no. But you know what I'm even more curious about? Like, Unohana versus really any of the Stern Ritter, not fucking Stern Ritter, any of the Espadas that were in Mundo at the time. Ukiura, Noitora, I guess Stark would have been there before he went to Karakura Town. Wasn't he? I think he was the last one to leave, because he had to go get Orihime, and then they went to Karakura Town. Yeah, so there was potential for them to meet there. Who else was still in? Zomari, and I would just really love to have seen. I mean, obviously from a narrative perspective, it would have made no sense, but it's still a funny thought considering what we know about Unohana now. And had she chosen to engage in combat with fucking Rudaborn of all people, oh my god, that would have been a massacre. Like, honestly, do I even see her having trouble with any of the Espada? Not really. Like, she would make Yukiora her little bitch if I were a betting man. And that would just be so satisfying, because I don't like Yukiora, and I think he's the most overrated piece of shit. If he weren't so overrated, I don't think I would dislike him as much as, like, a fighter. Definitely as a character, he's a whole bunch of nope. Especially the whole thing with him and Orihime. Oh god, you know what? I'm not gonna get into this, alright? We're moving on now. Basically, Unohana's the best. She shouldn't have died. Moving on. Another one that I feel like is kind of more of a fun one, more than one that makes sense with the story before. The last one that I feel is important is Kenpachi versus Ichigo rematch. Now, Kenpachi has expressed interest in this idea before, but obviously I don't think it's ever going to happen, really. Well, obviously. But even during like the narrative, after the Arrancar arc, there was never a point where there would be a realistic opportunity for them to fight and for it to make a lot of sense. But it's a good, like, a pretty interesting hypothetical fight, considering how much both characters have evolved ever since their very first fight. Kenpachi got both of his Zanpakuto releases. Ichigo got a Bankai. I mean, Ichigo didn't really fight Kenpachi even in the first scheme of his Bankai. So how do they stack up now? Current Ichigo versus current Kenpachi. Oh boy, that's tough. Like, this is the only one where I really cannot make a decision. Especially because we don't know the full extent of the new Tensa Zangetsu's powers. it's just so hard to really decide, considering the impressive display that we got from Kenpachi and his Bankai, and especially if he like masters it, like not even masters, but just trains with it a little bit and gets used to it, compared to Ichigo, who gets hyped up a lot, and then he gets bitch slapped around by both Askin and Yuha, and that's really the difference. See, because Ichigo's the main character, he went through the Royal Guard training, and we just kind of by default assume that he has the power. And it's just the difference between showing and telling. With Ichigo is a lot of telling, not a whole lot of showing. I guess the Hollow Horn, the Gran Reisero, that was cool. And then with Kenpachi, a lot of showing. They don't just tell you, they show you. Kenpachi is a real motherfucker. In fact, in the chapter where he gets his Bankai, there's hardly any dialogue. Like, the chapter is just pure action. No dialogue. And then with Ichigo, you're just kind of led to the assumption. The Kubo just kind of begs the question of whether Ichigo is powerful or not. Powerful enough to even challenge Yuha. And you just kind of take it for granted because he's the main character, even though he hasn't really looked that impressive. And that's the main reason I wanted the fight with the 8th Stern Raider to happen. If that fight had happened, this would be so much easier to judge, because then we would have a much better gauge of just how far above Ichigo is above everybody else. Potentially, because he's the main character, and he's gone through training. The fruits of which we never really got to see, which is disappointing. But, so yeah, you leave your thoughts down below. Current Kenpachi versus current Ichigo. Who wins? And then the last one is kind of a, I assume, a dropped plot thread, because at this point with the new chapter, it wouldn't really make sense for Uryu to come back to Soul Society 10 years later. He has no reason to be there if Yuha comes back, just based on the previous chapter. Go read it if you haven't. And that's this whole thing about the antithesis, his script, being hyped up as being the counter to the Almighty. And we didn't see it. Like, he never fucking used it against Yuha in the final battle. He just uses the arrow, and that's all he does. We never get a real sort of interaction between Uryu's power and Yuha's power. And it's so disappointing, and it's probably because of the rushing. I feel like Kubo was trying to come up with something to have the antithesis be the gateway to beating Yuha and halting his powers, but in the end, maybe he just didn't have enough time to come up with a proper, to properly develop this idea of the specifics of exactly how the antithesis would be a counter to the Almighty, so he just said, fuck it. I'll just use the arrow, and that was like his backup plan, just in case he couldn't come up with anything in time. I honestly kind of feel like that's what happened, and ultimately why that plot thread of the antithesis was dropped. And it's kind of sad, because, I mean, I could have seen that being used in a variety of different ways to potentially beat Yuha, where it's like, okay, I'll swallow it. I'm satisfied with that, because it's Uryu's power that's been referenced before, his script, it's been referenced the fact that Yuha couldn't use Auswallen on him, and Hashwell was like hyping it up that, oh, well, this is the counter to the Almighty, potentially. And then it just gets dropped at the drop of the hat. For the stupid Deus Ex Machina arrow. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. If you have your own thoughts below on any potential fights that I missed that could have made sense in the narrative of the Bleach manga. And if you like this video, you can go ahead and give it a like and subscribe. I will see you guys next time.